Hello everyone, welcome back to class. Today we have a slim class here in person, so I know everyone is going to be watching this online in video form. So this is really just for you guys. The three people in the classroom don't need an introduction. Welcome back. This is our fourth class, and we missed last Thursday due to a snow day, but we're going to be trying something different out, and hopefully everyone enjoys it. If you don't like it, feel free to tell me, and maybe I'll do something next time. We're going to be doing live coding. So I'm going to be talking and programming at the same time as you guys type along, and you can feel free to ask questions as well. And then yeah, we'll see how that goes. Alright everyone, so let's go ahead and go to practicalprogramming.org, and the first link that you'll see is the markup for today's class. I'll go ahead and make this full screen. Not one. And we'll go ahead and click on that. And this is our, this is our Codepen. I'll adjust these, see if we can. So this is the completed markup for what we did on last Tuesday. So we took all of the text from the Thought Catalog article and we marked it up in HTML, no CSS. And everyone was kind of trying to follow along, but I eventually, I don't know if, it was kind of hard because of the slides. So I went through and gave us a clean set of markup to work from. So this is the Thought Catalog article. I think if we go ahead and if we search for how strangers can, this is the article that we're going to be recreating. I took off some of the elements, like this sidebar over here. I decided it was a little bit, it was an extra thing. So this is what we're going to be recreating in the Codepen. And we'll go ahead and get started. So first, what we're going to be doing mostly today is marking this up with CSS. And there are a couple of ways to put CSS on a page. One way is through using a style tag. So there's a style tag, and if this was, can you guys see that? I wonder if I can make it bigger. Okay, so one way that we could do it is just this kind of pseudocode, but we could do something like style type equals text CSS, and we could put our CSS there. The thing that I didn't want, the reason I didn't want to do that today was because it kind of takes a little bit of a jump from just the CSS to also understanding CSS selectors, and that's just a little bit more complicated. So we'll get there, but today we're going to be using inline CSS, which is just using the style attribute. So we'll just be using a style attribute on each element. You'll actually start figuring out why there are a couple of different ways to include CSS, because it gets a little repetitive, but I will hopefully be able to cut down on that. So for those of, to kind of preview what we have so far, nothing very styled, kind of the basic elements. We can see how it goes. I'm going to pull up I'm actually going to pull up Vim really quick. You guys can see, maybe you guys can see some of my solutions, but I won't look at them too much. So one of the first things that we're going to do is I like to start out by we'll add the style tag to this first div, which is just the first block. And if you remember, we divided the page into two blocks. One was the header and one was the body and the actual article. And so what I'm going to do here is go ahead and add a border, just a black border. And this kind of gives you an idea of where this block that we're working with is. So if you guys add border 1 pixel solid black, and that's 1 px. Px is pixel. And pixels used to be kind of a direct mapping to the pixels on your screen, but these days with retina displays and other display technology, pixels aren't necessarily a one-to-one mapping. So now that we see kind of the larger box that we're working with, actually let me see if it'd be easier if maybe I can do this. There we go. I think this will be easier. Okay. You can definitely tell this is the first time for this. Can you guys see that? Okay. All right, so we have this border, and if you remember, we broke the heading into two other sections. So we have the thought catalog and the about and the Twitter links, and then we have the latest thought, which is where they show the latest article that they've posted. Actually, I'm going to make the background green, and then I'm going to make this background red. You guys don't have to do this, but this is just to show you how these two divs are playing with each other right now. Yeah.
Copy and paste code, or is that like a bad habit to get into? Like style border, 1 pixel solid black.
You can. The question is, can you copy and paste code? Is that a good thing to get into? And it's not a terrible habit. I think you'll see that once we start getting more advanced, people have come up with good solutions where copying and pasting isn't the best way to do it. A lot of stuff has been created to help minimize copying and pasting. So anyway, so we have the thought catalog, the top box, and then we have the latest thoughts. And I guess what we're going to go ahead and focus on now is the thought catalog div at the top. And I'm going to go ahead and remove this border and I'm going to keep the background red. And so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to, because the elements are going to be side by side, we're going to use what's called a float. And so the CSS property float, and in this case I'm going to have it float left, that allows the content, if you want to think of it, it basically allows the content to float above the content that isn't floated. So if you can imagine that everything on the page is positioned statically, and then I tell this one div element to float, then it's going to, you can just imagine it kind of lifting up off the page, and then when I say float left, it's going to lift up off the page and bump up next to either the edge of the page or another element that has also been floated. So that's kind of a complex interaction, and I have an article that's going to be posted in 8 minutes that actually goes over some of the more complex float use cases. And hopefully that will help you answer any questions that you may have other than us just working with the float. So for right now, don't get too caught up in that it's a float, but I think you'll start understanding kind of how it all interacts. So, so we're going to float. We have this, the thought catalog, and the about and the Twitter links floated left. And then we're also going to float the other div left. And you'll see that everything is kind of getting worse before it gets better. But when all of this is floated, the other content is trying to fill in the spots in between. So you see there was enough room for, in this case, there was enough room for how strangers can change our everyday lives, and it managed to fit up there. And that's because it's positioned statically, and those top two elements are floated. So I'm going to go ahead and try to give you guys an impression of where the containing div is. So I'm going to put a border back around. So we have this. So we have a border. I hope you guys can see it on the monitor, but this black border that appeared at the top of the page. So this black border is actually a border around the first block. So what you can see is that it has no height. And that's because all of the elements within that div are floated. And so because, if you think about it, they are kind of lifted up off the screen in a way. I got to come up with a better way to explain it. But if you imagine that they're lifted up off the screen in a way, then they really don't take up any space inside the div. So one of the tricks, and you'll find that CSS is actually full of a lot of different tricks. There isn't one, well, sometimes there's one way, the way, but for the most part, there's kind of a collection of tricks and hacks that have kind of become common usage to make sure that we get things rendered the way that we want. So one of the tricks that have come up, at least for floating elements and being able to contain the elements here, one thing that people used to do is they used to say, well, we're going to insert a break tag, so BR, and then the BR tag by itself, oh good, that's still correct. The BR tag by itself doesn't actually do anything. So you'd have to apply a style attribute and say clear both. And then once you clear both, you see that how strangers can change our everyday lives is now below those two. And if we wanted to make the border work, we would add it in there. But as I told you guys in some of the first classes, we don't really like to use the BR tag because it's kind of just for, it doesn't have any semantic meaning. It's for style only. So that solution, while acceptable, is not as good as the new hotness, which is using overflow auto, if I can spell. So now we've added overflow auto to the first block element. And the overflow, sorry, maybe I should explain this beforehand. Overflow is a CSS property. So all the things that we're putting in between the style attribute quotes are CSS properties. And overflow tells the browser, what do I want to do if content has exceeded the bounds of the box? So as an example, if I made this if I made this first box that has this black border around it, let's say that I made it, oops, let's say that I changed the width and I made it 100 pixels wide. So now you'll see that the box got really small and everything can't fit in it, and now the page is a mess. So now I should tell the browser, well, if everything can't fit into this box, I want the overflow to be hidden. And now you'll see that the overflow is hidden within the box. But let's say that I wanted people to be able to see it, and I wanted them to be able to scroll around. So I would say overflow scroll. And that would give me, well, oh, sorry. That's what I get for doing live CSS. So now I can scroll around inside the box, and the overflow allows me to scroll. So overflow tells the browser, what do I want to do with the extra content in this box if the contents don't fit? And so we're saying, just do whatever you want to do with it. Whatever you would normally do, do that. But we're not going to give this a width. And the trick in using this property is that because you've set overflow auto, the browser says, ooh, I need to figure out what to do with this block of content. Let me figure out how tall it actually is. So the browser actually re-renders this parent element and gives it the correct height with its contents. So that's kind of a CSS trick, and it's the first of many that you'll be learning in your hopefully very long programming careers, but it's short up to now. Okay, so we have these two elements floated. We're using auto to, we really probably wouldn't have, well, I think we would. And so now we're going to, now let's work on this green area. Let's get it kind of adjusted. So we have it already floating left, and you'll see that it takes up all of the space that it can. So this span tag and these paragraph tags, just because it's floated left doesn't mean that it gives it any kind of defined width. So if we look at, if we switch tabs and we look at the finished page, an application to be Ronan Farrow's girlfriend, we can see that the image, I just copied the image URL, and the image, well, it says it right here, but it's 218 pixels wide. So I'm going to go ahead and say that this box that we're going to be styling is as wide as the image, plus it actually has a border. So it's 218 plus 2 pixels on each side. So that's 220. You guys will get really good with border math. So I'm going to go ahead and make this 220 pixels wide. And now we see that because this is small enough to float to the left and stay on the same line, it moves up to the top and it's floated, and it sits right next to the other element that is also floated. And the images actually have a border. I don't know if you can see that. We can zoom in. But the image right here has kind of a 1 pixel border around it. So for that, we're going to use, on the image, we're going to say style equals, man, this gets really repetitive. There must be a better way, and there is. But we're going to say style equals border 1 pixel solid, and then pound CCC, which is actually just a shade of gray. So I feel like I should probably explain the 3 arguments to this border property. So in CSS, there's a lot of well, as programmers, we're all pretty lazy. And so instead of having 3 different properties like border width, 1 pixel, border color, black, which actually may not be the long form properties. You guys don't mind while I guess I forgot to specify border style solid. There we go. So instead of having to say these 3 properties to be able to specify a border, because programmers are lazy and we don't like to type very much, we like to type as little as possible, when they created the CSS spec, things got condensed down. So instead of having to say border width, border color, border style every time I wanted a border, we just settled on 1 border property, and the first argument is width, which is 1 pixel. The second argument is border style, which can be solid, it can be dotted, it can be dashed. Those are the 3 most popular. I think there are some others that you can have as well. And then the last argument is border color. So in this case, we're going to put in a hex color, which is just for that light gray. And now you'll see that we have the 1 pixel border on each side. That's the 218 plus 2 pixels on each side is 220. So now that this image has a border, we see that the latest thought text up here is styled in the thought catalog page. So let's go ahead and style that. So style equals, and I actually went ahead and figured some of this out. But the font size for that style is 11 pixels. So really, this doesn't really come in all that handy unless you're copying a page, which is what we're doing. But if you were creating your own page, you could experiment with font sizes and see, well, I want this to be bigger, I want this to be smaller. For this, since we're copying this page, I went ahead and figured out it was 11 pixels. And so we're going to say font size 11 pixels. Don't forget your semicolon. And now we'll see that the latest text, or the latest thought, is now smaller. One of the things that I think a lot of people get confused with is, if I'm trying to manipulate text, aren't the properties text size and text width and text color? No, they're not. I think the best, I've been trying to think of an easy way to say, well, what is font and what is text without having to look it up every time. I think it's probably best described as the properties are text dash something when you're referring to like the contents of a block element or the contents of an element. So you have something like text align, which aligns the text within an element. But if you're actually manipulating the text itself, then the elements are font dash property. So font size, font width, font weight. And color is always an interesting one because it doesn't have anything. Color is just color. It isn't font color or text color. So that was about as bad as it comes, and I thought of it all on my own. So now we have the font size is 11 pixels, and it's also italics in italics. So I told you guys, we can pretty much make anything do whatever we want. so long as we have CSS. We don't need to add, you know, as some people would be like, oh, I'm going to add an EM tag here, and boom, italicized. But in this case, I don't think they really are adding emphasis. I think this is a purely style thing. So we're going to try to refrain from using superfluous markup, and we'll use a property font style italic. And now we have the latest thought italicized. And there's a little spacing between latest thought and the image, so we'll add border bottom, we'll just say 10 pixels. And nothing happened. So this comes, part of this exercise is so that you can see kind of the cause and effect, and you'll notice that the margin, oh, well, it's because I did border bottom, but margin bottom, nothing happens. So the part of the reason I want you to notice this is that a span tag is an inline element. And I don't know if you guys remember from last Tuesday, it was so long ago, there was like a foot of snow in between now and then, and we talked about inline elements versus block elements. And block elements are things like divs, p tags, h1s. Block elements have the ability to have a top and bottom margin. Inline elements don't have that ability. So when I try to apply a margin to an inline element, I get no effect. Now, I've said that we can do anything with everything, and we can. I could, for instance, use a CSS property called display and do display inline block, and I can get the margin that I'm looking for. But I don't really want to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that. I'm trying to figure out. There we go. So instead, you can think about, there's always like 4 or 5 different ways to think about how things fit together. And you may say, well, how am I going to separate latest thought from the image if I can't give it a bottom margin? And you can either think about it like, I'm going to give latest thought a bottom margin, or I'm going to give the image a top margin. So there I get my top margin. So there's always a couple of different ways that everything can actually be done. So you may not be able to give a bottom margin to one element, but you can give a top margin to another. And I think you'll find this especially when we start producing HTML with Ruby, and you're not really going to be able to have to hand enter the CSS for each individual item. And so if you have a group of items they may not be formatted properly if they all have, you know, a left margin, but maybe they can have a right margin. So I think you'll start seeing that as we get there. And so let's look at lost my solutions. This is where the solutions help me know all the font sizes and stuff. So now then let's look at, what we're going to look at is this article title. Now on the thought catalog page, it's bold and it's a different size, and I think there's a little margin there too. So for the article title, we're going to change the font weight to bold. Style equals font weight bold. And I don't think we've covered font weight yet, have we? But font weight is one of those font properties that actually modifies the actual text, and that's why it's font weight. And I'm sure that someone with more knowledge than I would know the origins of font weight. I'm sure when Gutenberg was printing books, there were different weights of different characters, and you can specify different values on a gradient, like font weight 100, font weight 500. Bold, I think, is a placeholder for some sort of numeric value. But in general, unless you're doing some sort of very much typographic setting, you're going to use a couple of values. Font weight normal, which is a regular font weight, or font weight bold, which is a bold font weight. So for now, we're making font weight bold. And I don't know if you've noticed, but the type is different. The whole page is actually in a sans serif, and what we currently have now is a serif font. So how are we going to change the text, all of the text, to be in a sans serif font? And I actually went to Thought Catalog and figured out their fonts. But we're going to use the font family property. So in this first block of the containing div, we're going to use font family, and font family allows you to specify font names that browsers will use to render the page. So the fonts are ordered in the order that you would like for them to be used. So not all computers come with all fonts. So for instance, Arial is the last font by preference that they would want to be used. And it's mostly installed by default on every single computer ever made. And Helvetica is installed on, is a very common typeface that is installed on most or all Macintosh computers, Macs as they call them. And I don't know if it's installed on PCs, but anyway, that's why you specify multiple fonts, and font family is how we do that. So now you see that because I specified the font in this first div, you can see that all of the text in the header, the heading div, has changed into the sans serif, but the article title as well as the content has not changed. And that's because, as far as text styles are concerned, they are inherited only by the children of the element that has the property. So to go ahead and make the page all the same font, an easy way to do that is to go ahead and wrap the entire page in another div, and I'll go ahead and indent all of the other content, and then close my div. Actually, a shortcut that I can tell you about, if you highlight all of the text and then you hit Command and close bracket, then it will indent. And it'll indent it, and then you can also hit the open bracket, Command open bracket to unindent, dedent, I'm not sure. And that's pretty much universal on Macs, and I think that Codepen has it for Windows as well, except it would be Control instead of Command. So now we have the whole article has the nice sans serif font, very readable. And I think this font size is pretty close to what we were looking for this article title. So let's go ahead and focus on this smaller text right here, which is a little excerpt from the article. And that is, I believe the font size was 10 pixels. And you can see it gets really small. And it was also in italics, so we're going to use font style again, font style italic, and we have the excerpt. So I'm going to go ahead and, well, I guess one of the final things that we should do for the latest thought box is to go ahead and give it some space between the thought catalog logo and itself. So we can measure this, and on a Mac you can hit Command-Shift-4 and it brings up a little utility to let you take a screenshot, but it also has a number. So if I click and hold and then drag, I can measure distances, and in this case it's something like 80 something pixels, so we'll call it an even 80. And then if I hit escape, it doesn't take a screenshot. So I measured between the end of the thought catalog text and the beginning of the latest thought text. And it was 84 or so, but we'll call it 80. So we'll give the, there's a couple of ways we could do it. We could either do a margin right or a margin left, but in this case we'll do margin right. So give it, that was incorrect. So we'll do a margin right on the thought catalog div. And we have our right margin. So now if I remove the red and the, I'll go ahead and remove the green background actually. And you'll see that things are shaping together and shaping up. So now with the thought catalog, this area up here, one of the things that we have here that you'll end up seeing a lot is a list that actually needs to be horizontal instead of vertical. So here they have the about and the Twitter links, and they're next to each other. We represented those as a list because it's a list of links. The only difference here is that they're horizontal instead of vertical. So all HTML elements come with some sort of default style, and there's something that most people, when they set about doing CSS, the first thing they do is load some sort of normalization CSS style sheet. And it basically takes all of the default CSS styles and normalizes them across browsers. So one of the things that we're dealing with right now is that an unordered list has a lot of padding. And padding, if you think about an element as a square, padding is space inside of the square that kind of pushes in on the content. So if, for instance, if I gave a border to this unordered list, oh, I think I might have lost. There we go. This is live CSS. Anyway, so if I put a border around this unordered list, you can see that there's actually space right here on the left of the links, and that is padding. And an unordered list comes by default with some padding. It's kind of annoying because I always end up removing it, because I rarely ever use lists as actual lists, like a grocery list. But let's go ahead and remove the padding. So we'll use the CSS property padding. For now, we'll just say padding left 0. And whenever the value is 0, you don't have to specify 0 pixels because 0 of anything is 0, so it assumes you don't need to specify. So that's why we don't. If you don't have to type it, don't type it. So now that we got rid of that padding, I don't know if you can tell this, but there were also bullets. And those are actually still there. So let's go ahead and get rid of those, because I know that you'll run into this eventually. And this one has kind of a weird CSS property name, but list elements have a property called list-style-type. And right now they're set to disk, I believe. That could be right, it could be wrong. It could just be going back to the default. I don't know. But we're going to set it to none, and that gets rid of the bullet. And I'm just going to copy this style to this other list element as well. And now that both bullets are removed, I'm actually just going to remove the padding. So now we have a nice, clean, unordered list to work with. And what we're going to do is float the list elements. So I'm going to float both of them to the left. And you'll notice that the unordered list containing element actually doesn't have a height anymore. For all practical purposes, we don't really care about that. So I'm not going to do overflow auto, but I could. If I did overflow auto, you'd see the border come back. But in this case, it doesn't matter. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the border on the unordered list, just leaving the padding. And I actually realized that in my default CSS, I don't actually have links around the text in the list elements. So we're going to add a link to these. So that's the anchor tag, and the attribute that gives links their linkiness is href, hypertext reference. So if I just do pound, that's actually, it's going to go ahead and show a link, but it won't take me anywhere. So that's good enough for our purposes right now because we don't really care about navigating too much. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap links around both Twitter and the About page. So yeah, href is the attribute that we use for links to point them to URLs. I mean, I could, for instance, I could have this go to my URL, judd.me, and it would take you there. One thing that always gets a lot of people about links is wanting to do something like this and say, oh, well, I want to send someone to judd.me. But if you don't specify the protocol beforehand, I think Chrome, yeah, I was hoping Chrome didn't fix this, but it'll actually think that you're trying to send someone to what's called a relative link. So I realize I just got myself into something. Now I'm going to have to explain. A relative link versus an absolute link. If I send you to http:// or / actually, judd.me, that's an absolute link. If I tried to send someone to /judd.me, that would be a relative link, and in this case it would take you to codepen.com or codepen.io/judd.me, and that's a relative link. And it comes in handy when you want to, for instance, if you have a blog and you want to send someone to an article, and the article URL is just /article name, then you can just, instead of having to type out http:// whatever.com/article name, you can just do a href article name.
So this would be good to use that /.
Exactly. Exactly. I actually think we'll go ahead. That's a good idea. So in this case, this would be a good time to just do /about, and that's probably the thought catalog about page. Well, I'm not going to look. And in this case, this is a good way to point this out. http:// twitter.com /thought catalog or whatever they are. So now we have an absolute link and we have a relative link, and this is how we get around the web. So man, now we have this ugly blue color. And you'll notice that links are particularly annoying to style without some sort of, without the better way of doing CSS, because all links come with a default color. So you always have to override the color on links, and in this way it's kind of annoying. But we'll go ahead and make these black. So we'll say style equals color black. And now one of them is black. And I will just copy and paste and make the other one black. And if we look at these two links, we actually notice that they're uppercase. And you may think, oh, well, what we'll do is we'll just make Twitter all uppercase. But that's not really semantic. Twitter's not really uppercase. That's stylistic, the reason they want it to be uppercase. So in the HTML, we'll go ahead and keep Twitter like it is, but we'll use a really nice CSS property called text-transform uppercase. And now the text is uppercase. And our HTML is still very semantic. Don't you guys love it? And now we have the about page is uppercase as well. There's got to be a better way to format this. My screen is so small. Sorry guys, there's a problem. What's the problem? Okay, so what you may have either done a classic mistake, which is forgetting the ending, forgetting the closing tag, which is so classic that that doesn't break. Or it's actually you probably forgot the closing quote on the href. I don't know. Browsers are getting so good at rendering bad HTML. I can't break it. Maybe. Oh, okay. Right. So if like something really weird happens, the first thing to check for is, did I leave a quote open? Because that will really screw things up, like it's screwing this up right now. Or did I leave a tag open? And it becomes really apparent when you're doing like lists of things, or you leave a list open, and then all your elements on the page have a 15 pixel padding to the left. And you're like, why is everything shifting over? It's because you didn't close the unordered list tag. Yeah, let's see what happens if I do this. If I remove the unordered list tag, nothing. The browsers are too good. Okay, we'll keep moving. So now that we have uppercase, Twitter, and about, let's go ahead and make the text smaller. So we're going to use font size. Font size, we'll just say 10 pixels. Dot catalog makes everything very small. And we're going to add that to the, we can add it to the anchor element. We could also add it to the list, or if we wanted to keep from having to do this on both of them, we could move some of these styles to the UL element, the unordered list element, and they would also work. Let's see if I can new pin. Okay. And we're back. So one of the things that I guess you guys should notice that I didn't even really realize when I was doing this was that it's a good point to make, is that so long as, in this case, the elements don't have a default style that that eclipses the styles that we give to the parent elements, the parent style is inherited. So to explain that, we have this unordered list. The children of the unordered list are the list elements, the list items, and the anchors. So these are children of the unordered list. Does that make sense? Okay. Confirmed it makes sense. So to illustrate this, so let's say I have text transform uppercase on this unordered list element. Now if I, on the actual anchor element, said text transform lowercase, oh, my voila moment was missing, then you'll see that the anchor is lowercase. So even though the parent says uppercase, text transform uppercase, a more specific child says lowercase. So the most specific selector wins. So in this case, if you think about it as kind of a tree, if we go from the about text out, one level out is the anchor, and the anchor says lowercase. 2 levels out is the list item, and it doesn't say anything, but it inherits from 3 levels out, which is the unordered list. And the unordered list says uppercase. So 1 beats 3, so we have a lowercase tag here. But let's go ahead and get rid of that, because we want it uppercase. Right, yeah, we're getting there. So right now it looks like one word, and that's because by default these elements don't have any margin or padding. And you'll also kind of notice here, I think the text is a little closer together. So we'll use, to make the text closer together, getting out my cheat sheet, and we'll use letter spacing. So a CSS property called letter spacing. We'll make it 0 pixels. Or we can actually make it -1. I can't remember what the value was. Well, see, if we make it too small, then we lose the text. I think it was 0. Or -1. Maybe it was -1. I'm trying to think. We'll go with -1 for now. So we use letter spacing, and that brings the text closer together, which is, I think, what Thought Catalog was doing to achieve a little bit of their style. And we do have a problem in that these are both, they look a lot like one word. So let's go to Thought Catalog, and let's hit Command-Shift-4, get out our measuring instrument, and let's measure in between. It says around 20 pixels. So let's call it 20. Oop, wrong code. And on one of the list items, let's go with the Twitter one. Let's just say margin left 20 pixels. And now they don't look like one word. Now, the other thing is that they're also closer vertically. So they're probably like 10 pixels vertically. So then let's figure out where that's coming from. So right now, if we just bring out our little measuring tool, there's probably 30 pixels. So it's like, wow, where's the 30 pixels? Where are they coming from? So this is where we find out more about the default styling of different elements. So if you look at the H1 element that has the Thought Catalog logo, if we add a style equals whatever background gray, we'll say. Well, it doesn't seem like it's taking very much space. So this is getting into a little bit more about the difference in margin and padding. So margin, well, padding we already kind of went over, which is with the unordered list element. You saw that the border around the element, the contents inside were pushed away from the border. So margin has kind of the opposite effect in that elements outside of the element are pushed away. So heading tags come with some default margin. What is the default? It kind of varies across browsers, and that's why people like to have normalization style sheets. So for now, we'll just say margin bottom 0. And that brings the about and Twitter closer. We also need to make, while we're styling this h1 tag, we also need to transform thought catalog to uppercase. And you'll notice that we actually kind of broke some of our layout, but that'll be fixed momentarily. And then we'll change the letter spacing to -3 pixels maybe. And that brings everything closer together. It's way trendier. So we're getting there. Now, the text is actually a little bit smaller in this preview. I think I accidentally closed my solutions again. I'm too good at closing the window. And I went ahead and tried to come up with some, well, I thought I did, I guess I didn't. We'll make the text a little bit smaller. So we'll make the font size something like, let's say, 26 pixels. And they did this in an image. They didn't use text. I don't know if you can, because I can't highlight the characters, they used an image. We can do it without an image. The only thing that we're missing right now is this little registered trademark, but we can even do that. So let's add that in really quick, just because I'm up for a challenge, and we'll wrap it in a span tag. And there's an So in HTML, some of the special characters are called HTML entities, and they begin with an ampersand and then a code. So the code for the registered trademark is ampersand reg and then semicolon, and that is parsed as an HTML entity. So here. And let's go ahead, we can make it smaller. And I think now is a good time to introduce you to the fact that there can be something other than just pixels. So let's say that we want this to just be 50% smaller than the parent element, the parent text size. So the H1 text size was something like 26 pixels, and because we said 50%, that makes this something like 14. And we want this to be vertically aligned to the top. So with text, you can use a property called vertical align, and we can say super, and that puts it vertically aligned at the top. Man, I've been talking for quite some time. I was hoping to actually get through more of this, but I think I'm going to wrap up for today. So, actually, I thought of a great assignment for everyone. So, as an assignment, which I'm definitely not going to check, but is going to be really good for you to do, is to go ahead and try and continue the next part of the styling. So we went through almost every single tag or CSS property that you'll need to style the rest of the document. So what I want you guys to try and do before Thursday, because we'll probably be doing something else on Thursday, but is to style the rest of the document. And I'm actually going to go ahead and give you a little bit of a hint in that one of the things that, well, two things. Notice here that there is a border on top and a border on bottom. So conveniently, the places where this border is on top and bottom pretty much coincides with our header block. So I'm going to go ahead and change this to border top 1 pixel solid, and we'll just go with that light gray color and give it a border bottom as well. And because of the, like, if you look at this, you say, well, these are pretty tight. They could use a little space. So let's go ahead and give this padding top, and we'll just give it 10 pixels, and padding bottom 10 pixels. And now the top is pretty much complete. Remove the background. Done. Now you'll notice that this doesn't center, and that was going to be my final hint. The last thing for class today is centering the entire document. So with that, we're going to give it a width of, we're going to give that in the entire, that top div a width of let's say 940 pixels, and then we're going to use margin left auto, margin right auto, and that centers the document. You really can't see because this monitor is so small. But if I, for instance, I made this 800, you can see how this width is 840 and it's centered. So I'm going to post this online, and I'll let you guys try and finish the rest of it. It'd be really great if you tried to finish it. If you run into any problems, if you're doing it on Codepen, you can just email me the link to your Codepen, and I can help you out with any mistakes you might be making. So with that, that is the end of class today.